Oh, Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. Christos voskres, voistinu voskres. Christos anesti, alitos anesti. Yeah, good times, good times. Well, you can't hear him because I muted him. Man, if only I had this kind of control in real life, right? The ability. We have Deacon Timothy. He's waiting in the green room right now. He's freshening up. He's eating his blue M&Ms. Only blue M&Ms. You know how these hotshot actors are. They real demanding. But we did that for him, and we have the music that he requested. Nothing but B-52s. Okay, fine. We're heading down the Atlanta Highway. That's not a bad way to warm up. So, hope y'all are well. Let's go ahead and get ready for today's show. Get ready for the day by doing our breathing and our Jesus prayer. And y'all, just a little bit on this. So, this is one of those landmines that you think you're walking through a pleasant field and smelling the flowers and it's all beautiful and sunshine and birds singing, right? And you'll say to somebody, "Oh yeah, I've been doing some deep breathing with the Jesus prayer." Oh no, you're doing what? Do you have a monastic spiritual father? Boom, there goes the landmine, right? So just tell them, if somebody reacts that way to the fact that you've incorporated deep breathing into your prayer rule, just say, I'm not looking to see angels. I'm not looking for revelations. I'm just finding peace. And I find that breathing deeply allows the Prince of Peace to make himself known in my heart. Right? Just sidestep that one, right? Then the explosion just it isn't real. Right? You just took the gunpowder right out of it, right? Because that's what they're speaking to. They're speaking to this fear that we're going to put on airs, right? And we're gonna get deceived into seeing visions that we are not qualified to discern. And we can talk about that in a future show, but that's not what we're about. We're breathing deeply to find peace and to pray. And that is our common inheritance as Christians and as human beings. If you go and you talk to a psychologist or a counselor and you say, "Man, I'm having trouble. Stress is bothering me. I'm having trouble sleeping, stomach's upset," whatever the symptoms you have when you have stress, then she might say, "Hey, look, let's try some deep breathing, right? Let's try some deep breathing." Yeah, because it's the way our body works, and when you do it with the Jesus prayer, it's just so incredibly powerful because it matches that soul and body that we are made up of, right? So that's what we're going to do right now. All right, so as we breathe in slowly, we're going to say the first half of the Jesus prayer. We'll pause. We'll breathe out slowly. We'll say the second half of the Jesus prayer. We'll do that 3 times. It'll take us about a minute. Okay? Good use of our time. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Last time. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Okay, great. All right, now we're ready. We're ready. We'll bring him out of the green room. Hopefully he's done eating his blue M&Ms. We'll unmute him. And now we will see him. There he is. The one and only. The man, the myth, the legend. They're on the way. Oh man, it's great to see you. Great to hear your voice. So, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm being more intentional with how I take care of myself and how I represent in my family, right? And reaching out to be of service to friends and especially other clergy, and that keeps me alive. What do you do? What does self-care look like for Deacon Timothy Kelleher? Oops. Oh. Now we're there. Okay, you got to say that again. They couldn't hear you whining about your gluten-free M&Ms. So,
no.
So what is
self-care? Gluten-free and the right water. I want.
Yeah, sorry about that. We'll get it right next time. I promise you. I know we messed it up last time. We got a little bit better, right? We get it a little bit better.
It's not like this in the old Kangaroo show when I was in the green room. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Forgive us. So I asked you about your self-care, and you said that you breathed into a paper bag.
Yeah, multiple times a day. No, actually, this whole imposed monasticism has been, I've been back to working out a little more regularly. Not to where I should be, but I used to be, kind of a workout, not a freak, but very consistent. And so I'm back to the more regular exercise, physical and spiritual, reading, writing, and that kind of thing. And what else am I doing? I'm doing my Ukrainian language, and so yeah.
Excellent.
Otherwise, obviously, fascinating life.
Right. Well, and people should realize that what is it, like 3 a.m. where you live?
No, it's like 6-7. 6-7. But yeah, let's milk it. Yeah, it's about 3:30 here in Guam.
Right. So those bring you peace, right? When you write, when you're reading.
It's humbling when you haven't been working out as like you used to, and then you go back to it, and it's like, oh my god. But the funny thing is, once and it's always been the case when I've fallen out of it. Once you go back after about 4 or 5 times, then the whole thing switches, and that becomes the norm, and not doing it becomes the weird thing.
Yeah. That's especially the case when it's something that you have had a habit of previously. Right. Yeah, I find that. So if I don't do something like the Jesus prayer for a while, and then go back to it like the beginning of Lent, right? I'm like, wow, this, yeah. And then next thing you know, you're like, yeah, this is so much a part of my life. For me, it's walking.
Yeah.
By the way, the thing that that grounds me, I was running every day, and that's the best way for me to keep weight off is if I run every day. But when I run, I could be wrong. Maybe this is like fake science or something, but I feel like I'm more vulnerable. It takes me a little while to recover, not just the soreness, but also the breathing and things. And and my number one thing is, if I get sick, I can't stay sick. So right now, just like I walk for an hour each morning. I go with my dog, and that's when I say my prayers. It's very, very peaceful here. It's a great place to walk. We're blessed that way. Yeah. So these other things that you do. So you're studying Ukrainian. What are you using to study Ukrainian?
Well, I have a subscription to a service. It's called what is it called? Ukrainian podcast.com. And it's good. It's you can sort of modulate depending upon your level. So you can start out with just like the very basic stuff where the instructor is speaking almost entirely in English, and then you can sort of ramp up to where everything is in Ukrainian.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite there. And then I'm starting on the 11th of May with UKU, Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv.
Yeah.
They have an online thing where it's 4 times a week, 2 hours a day, and it's $270 for almost 3 weeks of that. And then they have 2 more sessions over the summer after that. And you can also do the intensive, which is 4 hours a day, or 5 times a week.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
great.
a pretty good deal, and it's a very small class.
Yeah. So I wouldn't imagine that this podcast service is going to teach you how to shea, right? It's like, you're not working on your litanies yet.
Well, I am actually.
You are.
Uh, yes, Father Andre, my first time down there,
Good.
I was about to begin liturgy, and he says to me, "How do you feel about taking the litanies in Ukrainian?" And I went, "Stop." I said, "Come again?" I said, "Well, if I had a little warning, I probably could have worked on that." But then, right in the middle, I get this little boldness in me, and I whip one off. And he said, "You're pretty good." So I've been working on it, and now I have them, so I can do
Good.
it.
Oh, thank God. And I imagine because of the way you've trained yourself, you can probably imitate the Ukrainian accents of different priests.
It's well, I don't know about that, but it's funny when I've always had an interest in things Slav. So in my original in a past life, when I began college, my original major was Russian studies. In my mind, I believe it or not, my intention was to become the U.S. Secretary of State. And at the time, you had to be really, Russian, heavily Russian, because it was Cold War and all that.
Right.
So I began the program, and then they dissolved it after 10 days. No cause and effect there, I don't think. But it was just only 2 people in the whole program. So they just said, we'll see you when we have more interest. So I would try and do some study on my own. So when I lived in L.A., which is a huge Russian and Ukrainian population these days, I would try sometimes. In almost all the cab drivers in L.A. are Russian, so I would try my Russian out, and they go, they just ignore me and speak English. So then I got this new program, which is fantastic. It was invented by this American guy named Mark, who lives in Sevastopol, and it's really, really good. And I got, I learned more in the first week of doing that than I had in all the years getting up to it. And I had taken tutoring one-on-one, and my accent is pretty good. So I would get into a cab and I would say something, and they assumed that I was fluent. And and I'd be like, no. Sorry, you have the wrong idea. Let me out.
Oh, that's hilarious. So did the president ever call and offer you that position, Secretary of State?
No. I was on a submarine in the Indian Ocean at the time, so I was indisposed.
And we've suffered as a result, right? Yeah. So that's I was, that's what I was doing too. So, very interested. One of the earliest, political things that I ever read. My mom got me Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, right?
Wow.
And I was like, what? And then come to find out it's all true. And so my heroes were all of the refuseniks and things, both Christian and otherwise, the people who were martyrs to the system and stood against it. And when I was able, when I went to school, well, I started out pre-med, and they washed me out pretty quick. Schools, the University of Georgia was set up. I came into the honors program, pre-med, and that is just, you got a target on your back. They're like, oh yeah, you think you're something? Well, come to find out I'm not. So I left and joined the Army, and it was the Cold War. So, of course, I went into intelligence, and they taught me Russian. So that's all we did for a year.
In Monterey?
Right. So I went to Monterey for a year. And that's all we did. We just studied Russian, and I was such a poor student, and I'm not that smart, right? So for the first half of the year, I was borderline. We lost half our class, right? We lost half our class. If we'd have lost our half the class plus one, that'd have been Doug Perkins. Adios, right?
But persevered.
Right, and I figured out how to study. So once we made it through the first half of class, it clicked. I kind of figured out the system, both of studying and the way the language was structured. They had a system for teaching us Russian that they had it down. Right? They just had it down. and so graduated well, and then went back to college, and it was a different experience because I knew how to study, and they didn't have a major at the University of Georgia, so I majored in political science. I minored in international affairs and Russian, but I took enough hours to have a Russian major. There was a professor there, Ilyena Alexandrovna Krasnoshokova, and she was the daughter of an enemy of the people, right? So I had this living experience, someone who witness of what, just the oppression of that Soviet system, how in egregious and subtle ways it just tried to control everyone's life, right? And her father. So we are gonna talk about things that other people are interested in eventually, right? But her father was, Alexander Krasnoshokov, and he was a revolutionary. He was a Bolshevik, and when the Bolsheviks, were getting nailed by the Tsarist regime, he went to Chicago, and he took the name Tobelson, and he started a law practice, and he was successful, right? And then, when in 1917, when things started looking, possibilities were opening up again for the revolutionaries, he came back. He came back, but instead of staying in St. Petersburg, he went to the far west. And when the war was over, he cut a deal with the Americans, because there were still Japanese out there. He cut a deal with the Americans to get the Japanese to leave, and then as soon as they left, he would declare the Far Eastern Republic. He'd have democratic elections, and we'd have a foothold in that part of the world. Well, you know what happened? We got them to leave, right? We got the Japanese to leave, and then as soon as that happened, he turned the keys to the kingdom over to Lenin, right? So it was, it stayed part of the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, whatever you want to call it. And so he's really one of these prime movers in that Bolshevik movement, and then Stalin had him killed. And of course he did, because what do you do? What do? You kill everybody who's got an independent source of power or respect or authority. So she grew up, so he was an enemy of the people. So she grew up as a daughter of the enemy of the people, a formal title that kept her from being able to go to the best schools and getting the best positions and things. So she was able to immigrate because she was Jewish, under the favorable immigration laws that we had at the time. And so she taught me all kinds of things, and we would study. We'd have a class on Lermontov, and we'd just read Lermontov, his poetry, Герой нашего времени, and we'd read it in the original, and she was just, she had such a poetic soul. It was, so I fell in love with the Russian culture through her, and my animosity towards authority grew.
Yeah.
So there's.
I heard about your anti-authoritarianism yesterday on your
man.
Roberts.
Yeah.
Crazy rule.
Well, you know how it is. So I never got called by the State Department either.
Oh no.
But I used Duo.
Well, I can either deny that I did.
Yeah, right. Well, I wasn't on a sub. They just have a better filter than that.
I was actually eating stuff on campus, and then I had my mouth full. I couldn't answer. But I've been doing a lot of research in this area for a couple of projects I'm working on, and it's funny. I'm reading this book on the infiltration of the KGB into the Orthodox Church in Russia, and also in Ukraine, in Poland, and also in the Vatican. And so I'm reading the book, and there's a footnote, and I read the footnote. It's an essay called Chekists and Kazakhs, and it's good. And then he's got some footnotes, and one of the footnotes is to Father Anthony Ogolnik, an unpublished paper, which I was able to track down. It's a 79-page paper, and it is fabulous. Anybody who wants to read up on the history of the Ukrainian, which led to the current, interesting developments in the Ukrainian church in Ukraine right now, would do themselves a world of good to read this paper. It's really well written, and it covers everything. And so yeah, it's funny how things connect like that, you know.
Yeah, so connect the
And
dots for
are you
people.
familiar with?
Connect
Yeah.
the dots
Well, what do you mean?
with Father
Oh, Father.
Anthony.
Well, Father Anthony. This is something I mentioned in a comment after you did
Hmm.
your talk with who was it?
Gabriel, Father Gabriel.
Harry, Father Gabriel. Yes. You know, and yesterday with Father Robert, you said, you know, how do people come to this church? How do they? What's their typical first contact? And in my case, it was you initially, but I had been reading um, theology and philosophy in from the East, and I was becoming more and more, you know, over the years interested in that almost primarily. And I finally stumbled upon this character named Ugolnik, Anthony Ugolnik, who turns out to be a Ukrainian Orthodox priest of this jurisdiction. I don't know if he's still in Pennsylvania or not. Was teaching at the Franklin and Marshall. Read his book and just tried to find videos of him. Unfortunately, there are few, but the ones that are on there on YouTube are terrific. He's just what a resource he is. Um, and so there, but I didn't make the connection that he was Ukrainian Orthodox. And then I discovered your Good Guys Wear Black. I said, this is cool. This is outside the box. This is innovative, and this guy is substantial. I really like this because, you know, at this point in my life, people who are going through the motions and doing all the you know, the Pollyanna stuff, I'm not, you know, I can't tolerate. I can't bear it. But your voice sounded authentic, and you were saying things that were deep and were touching me. And then, so I, you know, I'd follow you, and then discovered your podcast. And then I discovered through Ancient Faith this guy named Gabriel Rochelle. So all three of you turned out to be Ukrainian Orthodox. And so there's this unseen network that actually rises to the surface at some point. And I go, bing, bing, bing. These guys are pretty good. Got
Right.
something going on here.
And all three of us
And then
have that southeastern Pennsylvania connection, right?
That's
Um,
right. Yeah, and Father Gabriel, especially with Philadelphia. I have roots in Philadelphia.
yeah, yeah. Well, glory to God.
So
Yeah, so I use Duolingo. That's the way that I'm keeping up with my Ukrainian. What the main way that I
oh
did
yeah,
it? Yeah, yeah. So you know, it's not great, but it's easy
it's free.
and it's free. Yeah, and so I just do a lesson every morning. I'm sure that my Ukrainian is atrophying because I was going into seminary 2-3 times a week, and so I got to interact with the students in Ukrainian because you know that there were a couple of things that I wanted to do. One, I wanted to learn Ukrainian better and you know pick up new words and correct pronunciations and things. But also, I thought it was important that they see me struggling to speak Ukrainian well
Right.
because they were struggling to speak English well. And I didn't want
Yeah.
them to be self-conscious about it. So if they see someone in authority who doesn't mind being wrong, right, they learn to be a little bit, to push themselves a little bit more, right? And
Hmm.
yeah, like I was saying with Deacon Adrienne, you know, it was so funny because it was so American. So I would do like a litany or something in Ukrainian, and they might respond in English. It was just so, I love it.
That's always
I
a
was like,
confidence builder.
oh, this country is so awesome. I love it. But there's not much call for Ukrainian language in the parishes that I'm serving right now. It's
Oh, that's yeah,
yeah, no call for it at all.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, glory to God. So
Hopefully, a couple of shouts out.
mhm.
Today's my brother's birthday. I just wanted to say happy birthday, William, and also congratulations to his daughter, my niece Jennifer, who's gotten into Virginia Tech Veterinary School, which is no mean feat. And my nephew, Christopher, will be enrolled at Mount St. Mary's College this coming fall. So to
Wow,
them, kudos.
congratulations and no hayalita, no hayalita, no hayalita, no haya. No
No,
haya, no hayalita. You know, sorry, that's many years for those of you who are. That's the way what we sing it. You know, birthdays and anniversaries and things. We sing many years, and you know that melody is for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow." You know,
Right, basically.
basically that. Yeah. So it's awesome, this confluence of religious and popular culture. Just fantastic. Well, that's awesome. Congratulations, man.
It is really, it's really cool.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Virginia Tech. So, that's a pretty rural area.
I've been there. Yeah, yeah, and not to be, please forgive me for doing this, but it wasn't me, it was my brother, but he did make me laugh. We drove down there once a few years ago for my cousin's wedding because he had gone to, his wife had gone to Tech. And it gets real rural, and my brother's in the backseat going, down, in the bound, down, down. It's like, yep. It kind of feels like there's a still behind every fence there.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful area. Oh, wow. That's the part of Virginia. So if you ever drive from D.C. to the south, right, that's you're driving through Virginia forever. It's like the Texas of the
Yeah.
East Coast because you're going diagonal through it. And when you get there,
Mhm.
that's kind of your last chance to have
So when you're at
something.
Tech, you're basically in Tennessee.
You're basically in Tennessee, yeah. And you're still a couple hours from North Carolina. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's your last chance to
Yeah.
get something like Chipotle or whatever your fix is, right? Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's really good.
Shoe five, now on. Yeah. So I've been listening to these, and I think you're doing a terrific thing here. I really do. And I know you're saying that you're just trying to put content out there, which is, I think, in and of itself a great thing. But you've had terrific people on. The first person I listened to was the first person you had, which was Father Frank Briella. And to this day, I cannot get through the whole thing. There's some glitch on my system here. I can't get through the entire interview. So I went out and I bought his book, and I read that, and yeah, he's a fascinating guy.
Yeah.
And
He's one of those guys. He's like you. You're like okay, because I know him as a priest, right? Always
yeah,
known him as a priest, and someone who wanted to be a priest, right? And
hmm
then he'd just mention something. Oh yeah, I did this. I'm like, yeah. And then you find out no, he didn't just do it. He didn't just get the ticket, right?
yeah,
He
yeah,
he did it. Like no
yeah,
kidding, medical professional, just all
yeah.
in, all in. No kidding, member of the U.S. service, all in. No kidding,
Oh,
priest,
yeah.
all in. And just a beautiful man. Yes, we're so blessed to have him. Yeah, and he's got quite a
Yeah.
story.
And yeah. I mean, each person that I've listened to has touched on something. And I found some common themes in your discussion with Father Gabriel was, of course, rich. He's just a delight. I mean, you can have him on for ever. You wouldn't exhaust what's there. But the whole architecture of words and all that business, that was just great.
Yeah.
Um, I love Father Harry's conversation with you, and that especially really liked the anecdote he had where he was talking about the priest who warned him. I think it was like the eve of his ordination. Run, run. Um, and then Deacon Adrian was that was very moving. Some of the things he had to say about having to get real in the face of that kind of suffering and that kind of innocence of kids who are facing terminal illness. And that's the really touching story he told about promising this girl that putting that tube down her nose would be no problem, and then he went down and tested it, and he said it was excruciating. He had to go back and throw himself at her mercy. That was beautiful. And then Father Richard, you guys touched on some really great stuff about. We kind of had some common ground with what you talked about with Father Robert yesterday. I think it was about where do we go from here, and how do we reach, in Father Richard's case, especially young people. He's particularly concerned about them. And that's a concern of mine. And so I don't know if you want to talk about some of those things, we could maybe
Yeah, so
go in that direction. I don't
there's
know.
two topics there that I want us to mine here, and um, the first one is this. Everybody brings a story, and I love collecting stories. I love getting people's stories out, right? And stories are just good by themselves if they're well told, right? Um, they're interesting, and if you know the person, it has added value because you're connected to them. But there's something more going on for us because every story for us finds its place in the story, right? So we had started to talk last time about why the Bible is such a wonderful and fertile ground for storytelling, why it's such a fertile ground for a healthy culture, and what happens to our ability to share story when we move away from it.
Okay, I lost you a little bit there because you froze, and I missed. You said
Yeah, so
it's a fertile.
yeah, so the Bible and storytelling. The Bible and storytelling. We had started talking about that
Right.
last time. This is for us when we hear a story, it fits into that narrative. So it has just
Yes.
not the meaning of our connection with them and not just the meaning of something well crafted, but the fact that it meshes in with something that is ontologically just incredibly deep and real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's the most powerful vehicle for imparting wisdom. I mean, in terms of teaching, I mean, you can read a treatise on phenomenology of revelation, and that's important. And I'm fascinated by what is the nature of revelation. If you had put a video camera on the mountain when Moses went to the burning bush, what would you have seen? What would you have heard? What is the nature of that? Is it entirely interior, or what is the still small voice that was heard by Elijah? Well, these things to me are infinitely fascinating, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. And but stories is everybody's cup of tea. No human being can resist stories, and that's again coming back to what we talked about earlier. That's why Jesus chose to teach in parables. Those are things that stay with you um, and can grow. They're like seeds. So in terms of this stuff in my own background, I actually made a poorly timed foray into this at the synod this past year. But there's a project that I'm really interested in pursuing, and it was supposed to have been part of when I worked at First Things magazine. We were going to pursue this, and then there was a big shakeup there. But it's a program that would network students, young students, in college age mostly, in various media programs throughout the country, Catholic, Orthodox, particularly. Although there are a couple of schools like there's one in California. The name is escaping me. They have really, really good media programs. I mean, I went to Villanova, and we had nothing like that at the time. Now they have a state-of-the-art broadcast quality TV studio, radio station. It's amazing. And these kids are so adept and so sophisticated when it comes to technology. And as I opined last time, the stories just aren't there, because they've been cut off, from, the great myths of the world, the Bible stories. We're not reading the Bibles. I think that impacts our ability to tell rich stories. And so I was putting these things together, and I said, I used the anecdote or the story of Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber. And somebody famously asked him once, you probably know this, why do you rob banks? And Willie Sutton said famously, it's where the money is. And so if you were to ask that question to Willie, but put these words instead, where do you go to find today's young people? Well, there's one thing that I think that we have to take full stage. I think we may have lost each other. Are you there? Okay. Okay, so there was a huge spike in suicides, most acutely among 18 to 32-year-olds. Now, the next survey is no surprise to people who go to church, and that there's a huge drop in church attendance, and most acutely within the exact same age group. Now, the third study, independent, tells us that faith in God is obviously waning, while belief in the likes of ghosts, astrology, and magic is surging. That's a bad combination of things. And again, people suffering most in that is that age group. And those people are not in church, they're online, so we have to reach them. So this idea of this network of students would be to develop this network where people could cooperate on projects and have people who are the senior people, the adult people running the show, steeping them, finding ways to steep them in the rich tradition of stories, biblical, the classics, so that they have access to this well of wisdom from which they can draw, and so that and then to create a network out of that. I mean, a real network, like a broadcast network, almost, with its own channel, and collaborate on projects, from radio shows to radio plays to TV shows to movies to animation, all kinds of things, so that the culture is gradually infiltrated by a vision that is the ultimate humanistic vision, which is the incarnation, the story of the incarnation. So it would be a kind of Trojan horse in the culture, but it would have to be a serious professional caliber, and it couldn't be just very preachy and walking in and doing folk guitars and Jesus is my friend. It would have to be like more Flannery O'Connor than, say, EWTN. So.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Because, if there's an interest in there for ghosts and UFOs and all this kind of thing, right? Who has those stories? Well, we do. The cosmology, the true cosmology, is far more interesting even than the best, right? The Lord of the Rings, the cosmology there, with all of its magic and elves and dwarves and things like that, it's just a one-off of the true cosmology, right? And but people don't know that. We're so busy preaching morals that we don't preach mystery. And that's a big problem, right? Because the reason that we connected so quickly is because we're not interested in superficialities, right? Let's go real or go home, and sometimes there's a superficiality sometimes about interest in things like magic and ghosts and stuff, but there's a real yearning in every heart for something real. And when you find out, so I remember the introduction to one of Neil Gaiman's books. He describes how he just loved Tolkien and he loved C.S. Lewis. And then when he found out that C.S. Lewis was just an allegory, he was so disappointed, right? And this was kind of where he and an opportunity for faith kind of moved apart, right? And Neil Gaiman is a wonderful storyteller, but that's a tragedy, right? Because it points, things like Narnia, things like Tolkien, things like any well-told story, point to something deeper. The yearning in the heart that is satisfied, at least in part, by a well-told story is just a pointer towards something that is more real and that satisfies more deeply, right? Why aren't we getting that out there? Why is it so hard for us?
Well, for one thing, I don't think we acknowledge the reality of that. First of all, that I think there's maybe a false expectation that if we do things in church right or better, the kids will come. I don't think that's realistic. There's too much of a gap at this point. Too many generations are going unchurched and unexposed to things like Scripture. Not to mention imagine, the sacramental liturgical life of the church. And so that's a sine qua non, really. And then from there, we don't, people who are old enough to be able to impart some of this stuff tend not to be technically savvy, which is why it would be great to have kids, who, they can send rockets to the moon from their iPhone, and I can hardly retrieve my messages. It's amazing. So to connect those things and to also resign ourselves to being patient, because it's going to take time, but we have to believe in that mission, that they're there, that they're hungry, and that we have something to offer. And so do they. I mean, together we could do amazing things, and people want to be useful. Kids are hungering for spiritual truth, meaning in their lives, and the ability, which they have, to contribute something. What I try to say to people when I meet with them is, the world needs you to be the best person that you could be. I mean, we really need you. You may think that you're a schlub, but we know you're not. You have all kinds of gifts, and we need you to be the best that you can possibly be.
And that can't just be words. It can't just be words. There have to be those opportunities to contribute, and not just in the boxes that we've created because of historical necessity or whatever. Yeah. It has to be based in large part on the abilities of that person, on their individual story, right? And their encounter with need and fulfilling that need. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about liturgy and story, right? Because the way that we experience liturgy is profoundly mysterious, right? It's an entree. It's the thin place where this world of the seemingly mundane just gets interfused with the world of the more than eternal, right? The glorious. And so that's very much a part of our experience. I don't think that's very much of the experience of many people who come in. What it is for them is it's unintelligible. It hasn't been explained in terms of story very well, or of how it can fit into the personal story, right? And we can do better. We can do better. And there are things that you can do things like teaching liturgies, but that's a drop in the bucket. It's the individual time, the real encounters of two selves searching, right? Those opportunities and these networks that you're speaking of, that's where that can happen, right? Where people where they can be vulnerable and excited, and then just things just flower out of that. But what they sometimes encounter, it seems to me, is a set of rules, right? And like who was it? Homer Simpson said about Roman Catholicism, "You guys have more rules than Blockbuster," right?
I hadn't heard that.
It's a joke that doesn't work anymore, right? You got to explain. Well, Blockbuster, you see, back in the day, you got to set up the whole thing. But and that can be, if that's the way that people are encountering us, it's oops, we're doing something wrong, right? And that is so often the way that. So, for example, someone will come in for for a baptism, and the first thing they hear is, "Oh, well, here are the set of rules." No, that's not what's going on. No, there should be a celebration of wow, baptism, and then words come out just glorifying the reality of baptism, death to the old, life in the new, the waters of the Jordan and all this. That's the excitement, right? Instead, we pull out the rule hammer and we say right? And then expect that the service will carry that water, so to speak. The service will be the one that shows the mystery. Well, no, not if it's already been framed in terms of rules, because then that's already set up the encounter of that person with this sacrament. Whereas if it's framed in terms of wonder, of mystery, of entrance into something just spectacular, and then you say, okay, well, as we set it up, here are the things that we need to deal with, right? It's completely different. You know, it's a different conversation. So, anyways, it
Yeah, I mean, for example, when my mom died last year, um, went to her parish, and I, spoke to them, and then I immediately got a series of do's and don'ts, things you can do and can't do, readings that are approved, readings that are not approved. You can choose from these 6. Now, I don't know what the average person would do in response to that. Maybe it would seem helpful, because a lot of people go, well, I don't know where to begin to choose readings, But having been in the church all my life and up close and personal, I found myself just bristling at this. It's like, really? This is what I'm getting something from the Archdiocese saying, these are the things you can read, and that's it? And you have to follow A, B, C, D, and E. I was like, this is so impersonal, And so I went to meet the priest, and I told another priest friend of mine, I said, I'm going in there. I'm going to roll up my sleeves, and I'm ready for a battle. And of course, the guy who came in he was incredibly wonderful. And he asked me a little bit about my story. He said, well, you clearly know what you're doing. He said, pick some readings and then just send them to me, and I'm sure they're going to be fine. And they were. But I mean, if you're a person who has almost no connection to church life, and that's your encounter at such a vulnerable moment, why would you come back? And I was thinking of this the other day. It's like, people who leave, I would guess, and I haven't studied this, but my guess would be people who leave the church, especially young people, the majority of them leave because they haven't experienced love. They haven't felt like they've been loved in that church. Because if you feel genuinely loved, you're not going to stray, not that far. I mean, you'll go through your rebellious period, and you'll be questioning, and that's all normal, I guess. But if you feel genuinely at home and loved, and it's a dynamic, vibrant, life-giving, productive love, why would you leave? Where else are you going to go?
Yeah. So that connection of love moves you. It leads you to ask the question, can I believe this, rather than do I have to? Right?
Exactly.
And that it's a completely different thing. Whereas if it's first framed in terms of rules and judgment, then it's why do I have to? And of course your mind can come up with a million reasons why you don't have to. Of course it can. We're smart people, right?
Yeah.
So, and this isn't just marketing. That's what it could sound like, is, okay, lead with love so that people will buy in, right? No, that's not what I'm talking about. Love is the gospel. When you do that love, you are preaching the gospel. When you lead with the rules, you're leading with the old covenant. Now, don't call my bishop and say, Father Anthony and Deacon Tim, are calling for getting rid of rules. No, of course not. I mean, I'd be making stuff up that wouldn't be useful, right? We've got a set of way that we do things. I get it, but we're mistaking the direction of the flow. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. What was I going to say about that? It escaped me. But yeah. The other thing is, Father Robert last night used the word evangelization a few times, which is, absolutely key. And it's always struck me as funny that the term evangelical Christian, because to me that seems redundant. It does. Evangelical means, in the Greek, it means the good news. So any Christian is evangelical by nature. Yeah. And we should be a lot more about the good news. Hey, it's good news. It's not, I got some good news and I got some rules. Let's start with the rules. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, so, I got to live in Moscow for a few weeks back in the 90s. And there are places like this here too, I'm sure. But some of the churches, they'd have 2 things outside their doors that were just amazing. One of them's a price list, right? a price list. This is if you're
Oh, I'm
ordering a
sorry, I missed you approach.
Okay,
Oh,
so yeah, a price list. If you're ordering a
really?
baptism, this is how much. If you're ordering a wedding, this is how much. Okay. And then the other
Wow.
one was, the list of rules of how you need to behave before you go in, right? Which
Right.
do
Right.
there need? Yeah, there need to be rules, but it's okay.
Yeah.
So I walked in, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just visiting beautiful places. I walk into this one
Mm.
church. It's one of those churches where everything has icons painted on it. And I don't even notice that I'm doing this. I'm just in awe of the overall effect, right? And this is a good way to learn. An older woman with a head covering came up to me and said, "Don't lean on the pillar." Right? Because I was leaning on it, right? I didn't even notice, right? I was mortified. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry,
Yes.
right? Anyway, so we do. I mean, there are standards, right? But let's not
Yeah.
put the cart before the horse, or whatever the right metaphor is. So there's one more thing that I
Right.
wanted us to at least start talking about, and you hit on this some technology, and not just right now
Hmm.
we're using technology kind of ad hoc in response to crisis. That's what this is. That's what this thing is,
Sure. Yeah.
right? But being more intentional about our use of technology to bring the story, to connect stories, right? That's what we need to
Hmm.
be doing. What else? So the church is going to have some huge challenges coming up. Um,
Yeah.
Again, I hope I'm wrong, but financial challenges bring other things. Um, Deaths in communities
Yeah.
bring other things. So what what can we do to respond to that crisis? And because you've been through some intentional formation, what should formation look like for people who are involved in that kind of non-standard, non-cassock wearing evangelical mission? What can we do? And another way to say formation makes it sound like, oh, how can I make sure they're in their proper mold? How can we
Right.
equip the saints to do that kind of work?
Right. Well, that's a simple and a complex question, I guess, because part of it will depend on who these people are, what their backgrounds are. So, for example, in our church, that you'll have people who are recent immigrants, like for example, our seminarians. Um, they face an initial set of cultural challenges that your average American in the church won't face. I mean, English for one thing, cultural idioms and references that they don't yet have, and maybe aren't going to be comfortable with for a while, in terms of reaching beyond the native born Ukrainian population that they're serving. Um, I think my read of it is that the basics. I mean, the basics, and a great teaching tool would be the liturgy, and also, I mean, I keep meaning to do this, and I am compiling it, but I have a long way to go. I call it, it's all Greek to me. Um, a list of basic terms that we use every day that have so much valence, but we don't realize how easily misinterpreted they are. Sin, salvation, God, salvation. If you trace the etymology of those words, and you don't have to get all crazy and theoretical. For example, I was 2 days, no, the day after I was ordained, I took a trip into Philadelphia, and I got in a cab, and I had an incredible conversation with this guy. It became very emotional. We got stuck in traffic. It was an hour trip. And this guy realized where I was from, what I was doing. I told him I'd just been ordained. He was interested. He had been through some difficult times. And he came out. I said, I don't know if you're a believer. And I was listening to his story, and I said, I don't know where you come down on God and stuff. And he was a middle-aged black guy from the South. He said, well, honestly, I have a hard time with that. I said, do you mind if I ask why? And he started telling the story about being raised in a fire and brimstone, like out of the movies, fire and brimstone here. And I said, wow, and he was telling me, give me examples. I said, you'd be hard pressed to find that in the gospel. I mean, that's not the way Jesus deals with people. We're talking, and I can see that he's getting more and more interested. He's looking into the rearview mirror more and more. And at one point I said to myself, all right, all right, spent so much time in seminary, I'm going to use one of my $25 words. I said, the word hamartia is the Greek word for sin. And I said, because he thought sin, but he couldn't take it to God. The word hamartia is the word that we get, gives us the word sin in English. And it comes from a term in archery where you miss the mark. And, it's all about salvation is, God became human so that humans could become God. And as I'm talking, I could see this guy, his entire demeanor is beginning to shift. And we talked a lot. And he said to me at one point before we stopped, he said, and he had tears in his eyes. He said, how come I've never heard this before? I said, well, I don't know, and I'm sorry you haven't. And I can assure you, I'm not making this up. This is not my personal opinion. This is what the church has taught from the beginning. And we have gotten a lot of it wrong, and popularly, it's been misrepresented. We get out of the car. This guy had tears in his eyes, and he hugged me, and I thought he was going to break me in half. But I was like, that was just a basic kind of thing. You know what I mean? And it was so powerful. So to explain things like theosis and how that relates to sin and salvation, what is salvation? Because those things can seem so off-putting and so objectified and so impersonal and such an impossible standard against which to measure yourself that everything you do is failure. But it's not. You said mystery. Mystery is a personal relationship with something that is just too full to be able to contain. And so the mystery of Christ is a personal relationship, And it's all about, it's not what is God, it's who is God. So.
That's it. That's it, right? So if we can open our hearts, if we as Christians, and I don't just mean we as clergy, I mean we as Christians can open our hearts that way, this is what the gospel does. So we don't have a whole lot of time because I've got a paper due this week that is not coming together well, shall we say? What do you think? What about the role of testimony? So I grew up in the South, where the kind of the elevator speech of your relationship with Christ and what He has done in your life, this was just part of normal conversations, right? Mm-hmm. Being willing to give a testimony, not just in a formal church setting, although that happened, right? We would have regular series where people would give their testimony. It's a powerful tool because it links the personal story with the story, of the church. The economy of salvation is the shorthand that we use for it. I think this is an incredibly powerful tool. I'm uncomfortable with it being used from the pulpit during a liturgy. I've got that Orthodox sensibility now. But it should definitely be a part of our at least small group meetings. The provision of a testimony. This is my life in Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Because it allows the hearer to then ask the question, for one, I want that. I need that. My struggle is like that. Mm-hmm. How can I get that? Or if you're more mature, my story is like that too. Here's my story, right? So I really encourage people, to think, what is my story? What is my life in Christ? How have I found joy? And if you haven't found joy in Christ, let's talk about that. Because that's why I'm here. That's why you're here, is because we don't have time to play games with things that don't solve the big problems in our lives and in the lives of the world. And the answer is Christ. And He has brought joy to this world that groans in agony, right? Can I get an amen? Yeah.
Amen, my brother.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned yesterday with Father Robert that you were going to have somebody on who has experience in sort of teaching that elevator version. I mean, I would love to see that because I really need to do better with that because I sometimes say to myself, well, if you're a good, you lead by example, you preach by example. Well, I have a long way to go in that regard too, but I really, sometimes I say to myself, you chickened out. You should just really say what's happened to you in your life and share that with people because otherwise, what are you doing?
Right. And it has to be
Um,
real. Sometimes it because it's so much a part of the culture in some religious Christian subcultures, it can lose its authenticity. Right? It becomes
mhm,
scripted, right? That's not what we're looking for. It's not
yeah,
we're not looking for crocodile tears, but real tears. That's a part of
mhm,
most people's stories. So yeah, I do encourage
yeah,
you to to do that and to do it in all humility, right?
hmm
That's the driving thing. That's my goodness. So yeah, so Lord willing,
right.
and you know him, and right now because we
Huh?
built it up, he's going to be running for the hills, right? It's David.
Right, right,
David has
right.
agreed to come on and talk about giving testimonies. So David Murphy.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah,
Oh, good. Oh, good.
yeah,
That's the fellow. All
right.
right, good. I look forward to that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So and all these and this technology, necessity is the mother of invention, they say. So yeah, I mean, we have, you've done a great job even before this, but things like the guys who wear black and the podcasts and all that business. We can do more of this. I mean, I read that people are having Zoom happy hours. Why can't we have a Zoom theology on tap? You know, people have a beer and they talk about you, and you can pick something like let's talk about sin and go through the whole etymology of that and how it's interconnected with what is salvation and what is sin in relation to salvation because it's all a gift. It's not a test.
right. Yes,
You know.
a gift, not a test. So, all right. So we need to wrap up so I can get in there and get back into my multiple regressions and my test for heteroskedasticity. How can people get a hold of you when they want you to come and give a talk at their Orthodoxy on Tap via Zoom? How can they find you,
Oh,
Deacon Tim?
how can they find? Well, I do have a website. It's really in its nascent form. It's timkelleher.org. But how else? They could get to me through
Facebook,
my what, email,
email.
timjwk@gmail.com.
Okay. Yep. And I can help you
Yeah.
get in touch with him too if anybody wants to have him because as you see, I mean this is what Deacon Tim is called to, and he's not able to go and do his thing in Hollywood or wherever they do sets now, so he may be available, right? uh, well, Deacon Tim, I
Word for
really,
peanuts.
yeah, right. I really do appreciate your time, and I know everyone else does too. I know I speak for them as well. It's a real blessing to have you as a friend and to know that you're doing God's work. Y'all, let me read from my script here that my daughter Helen gave me. If you enjoyed today's show, go ahead and hit like. If you want to see more, you can subscribe. And if we get enough subscribers, I can retire and like buy a yacht or something like that. That's what I hear. That's what my kids tell me, right? They want to become YouTubers, right?
There you go.
And I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email. I'm father.anthony@yahoo.com. And until, wait, there was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, yeah, and if you like it, share it with people, right? Today's conversation, this is useful and it's real. So go ahead and share it with people until you can get Tim to talk at your own Orthodoxy on Tap, right? All right, until
Well, you really appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Until next
Thank
time,
you.
y'all. Oh, and let me give a little plug. So, Deacon Tim has agreed to be back on next week. I believe it's next Thursday. Um, Tomorrow we've got Father Theophon Mackey on, and his heart is just so beautiful. He's our vocations director. He's a craftsman. He's just fantastic. So I look forward to sharing his heart with y'all. Friday will be a weekend review, and I've got some awesome news articles to talk about with y'all. Some of them are heartbreaking, but really important. And then on Monday, get this. Guess who's agreed to come on the live stream? Come join me at my back porch. His Eminence Metropolitan Antonio.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, right.
That's great. That's great.
He is so good. I mean, people love it. They love it the way that our bishops do things like coffee hour. He's fantastic. So, anyways, next week is going to have some really good shows.
But a gift.
Yeah, he's got a real gift.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, until then, Godspeed.